there everybody, I'm Joe the Disney Guy, and you know what? I never want to grow up, and that means that Disney's 14th animated feature is perfect for me. That's right, it's time to take a look at Peter Pan. Back in 1904, Scottish playwright James M. Barrie wrote a play entitled Peter Pan, the story of a boy who never wanted to grow up and his adventures in a place called Neverland. The play was extremely popular in its day, and by 1924, Paramount Pictures adapted the play to film for the first time in the form of a silent movie. The play also affected a young Walt Disney who saw the production when he was a boy in 1913 and also watched Paramount's adaptation when it was released in theaters. It's interesting to see how many stories affected Walt so much as a child that in later years he would make those stories into feature films. Really, we're pretty lucky that Walt mostly read and saw fairy tales, otherwise we would have some strange Disney movies. Walt had always thought that the story of Peter Pan would be best told through animation, mainly because animation didn't have the restrictions that live action did. As opposed to people in animal costumes and characters flying on strings, as was done in the stage production, in the animated world, anything was possible. So it was no surprise that in 1935, between the story's popularity and the possibilities, Walt decided that Peter Pan would be his studio's second feature-length film. There was one catch, however. You see, obviously the story was written for children, and in 1929, J.M. Barrie actually gave the copyright to Peter Pan to the Great Ormond Street Hospital, a renowned children's hospital, in order to entitle them to any of the royalties made off the story instead of Barrie himself. A fantastic gesture, no doubt, but in terms of Disney, it did make things a little more complicated in acquiring permission to make their film. Finally, after 4 years of negotiations, Disney and the Great Ormond Street Hospital agreed on arrangements, and Disney was given permission to go ahead with their production of Peter Pan. One of the biggest challenges Disney faced when writing the story for Peter Pan was how to adapt a story as popular as Peter Pan for the screen while still retaining the feel and elements from the original stage production. For example, one of the biggest discussions early on was whether or not to include Tinkerbell's most iconic and the play's most famous scene in the movie. Just to catch everybody up to speed who's never seen Peter Pan on the stage. In the play, there's a part where Tinkerbell actually drinks a poison medicine in order to save Peter Pan, and then presumably dies. Peter then turns to the audience and asks for everybody who believes in fairies to clap their hands. The audience of course explodes in applause, and Tinkerbell is brought back to life, because as we all know, clapping hands is basically the same as a defibrillator. Walt eventually decided not to include this scene, reasoning that the idea of breaking the fourth wall and having the audience applaud just wasn't as feasible to do in film. The film was also much darker in tone in its original storyboards. Originally, Peter was to kidnap Wendy to bring her to be a mother to the Lost Boys, as opposed to her going willingly. Tinkerbell intentionally told Captain Hook about Peter's hideout in a jealous rage, and there was even a version where John Darling was left in the nursery for being too serious. All of these story elements would eventually be scrapped, however, for being too dark. We're beginning to see a recurring theme here where Disney and his writers would start with these horrifically dark versions of their classic films. But to be fair, that's because most of the source material that Disney used was also pretty dark as well. Really, you're starting to see why the process known as Disneyfying films would come about, because, let's be honest, do you think people would have liked Peter Pan as much if it started with a kidnapping in one of its first scenes? Much debate took place over how to start the story as well. There was originally going to be much more backstory on Peter and Neverland, but in May of 1940, Walt decided that the story should start in the nursery with the Darlings, because, to Walt, the story of how Peter Pan came to be was another story from the one they were trying to tell. Even elements of Neverland itself were changed and omitted, with many scenes involving the pirates and mermaids being left out, and an entire story element, the dog Nana flying to Neverland and the story being told through her eyes, was scrapped as well. By 1941, the story of Peter Pan was finalized, just in time for World War II to hit the studio, causing them to put all of their current productions on hold. One of the things I've always kind of wondered about is how would these films have turned out differently if it wasn't for Disney being shut down for World War II? I mean, Peter Pan was basically on schedule to be released about 10 years earlier than it actually was. But when you factor in that the animators would have had 10 years less experience, and let's be honest, you probably would have also had different voice actors, would Peter Pan have actually turned out how it did? Despite the war ending in 1945, the studio was in far too much financial trouble to restart a project as big as Peter Pan, and even in 1947, when the film was taken off the shelf, it was deemed that Cinderella was more important for the company's immediate future, and Roy Disney was also very skeptical that Peter Pan could even do well at the box office, causing the film to be pushed off to the side. It wasn't until 1950, with the company far more stable financially, that they decided to go back to work on Peter Pan in earnest. Disney decided to stick with some of their more established child stars to voice the main roles, with Catherine Beaumont, fresh off her role as Alice in Alice in Wonderland, cast as Wendy, and Bobby Driscoll, who achieved fame in Disney's Song of the South and Treasure Island, as the voice of Peter Pan. The casting of Bobby Driscoll was actually a really big deal, not so much because he was famous, but because he was a guy. See, at the time, and even today, the role of Peter Pan, both on the stage and on the screen, had been traditionally played by a woman. Partially to make sure the character looked young, partially to make sure you had somebody light enough to do the wire work, and partially so that the success of your production didn't hinge on the talent of a child actor. But the beauty of animation is you get multiple takes, there's no wires involved, and you can make the character look however you want, which made Bobby Driscoll the first ever male cast to play Peter Pan. Disney did, however, stick to a stage tradition with the casting of Hans Conried to play both the father, George Darling, and Captain Hook. Walt also made sure to bring the voice talent into storyboard meetings with the writers to give the actors a better understanding of their characters and their character arc before they recorded their lines. The next major step was, of course, animating the film. The look of the world was again achieved thanks to concept art from David Hall and refined and finalized by Mary Blair. Disney also again had the voice actors double as live-action references for the animators, and shot essentially the entire film in live-action before beginning animation. Just a quick aside on these live-action shoots, because we keep on seeing them come up, but I feel like I should explain why Disney had to do them. Yes, they gave the animators some reference footage, mainly for human motion, but they also allowed the writers to actually see the story play out in front of them. This was important, especially at this time, because it was very expensive to animate an entire scene just to have to scrap it later for pacing reasons. So if a scene wasn't working, the writers could just cut it out before it ever actually got to animation. So although it seemed like a lot of unnecessary and extra work, it actually saved the studio a lot of money. Two outside actors who were included in the live-action recordings were dancer and choreographer Roland Dupre to act out Peter's flying and sword fighting scenes in order to make him look more polished, and Margaret Carey as Tinkerbell. It was decided early on that Tinkerbell should be depicted as a girl as opposed to a beam of light like in the play, so the studio brought in Carey to show off how Tinkerbell would look. They had her act out Tink's initial scene on the mirror and liked Carey's performance so much that they brought her back to be Tinkerbell's official live-action reference and even cast her as the voice of one of the mermaids. So yes, the look of Tinkerbell was actually based off Margaret Carey, and not Marilyn Monroe like some modern sources have said. But hey, I don't think Margaret's complaining too much that people were mistaking her for Marilyn Monroe. The character animation on Peter Pan did pose some interesting challenges for the 9 old men, who were again tasked with bringing the story to life. Frank Thomas was assigned to Captain Hook and was caught between two conflicting styles for how to draw the main villain. The story people envisioned Hook as a foppish, overly proper, and goofy character, while the director saw Hook as a cruel and mean pirate, worthy of being a dangerous adversary to Peter. Thomas eventually took these two ideas and combined them to give Hook his final appearance. Milt Kahl was tasked with animating Peter Pan, and worked tirelessly on finding a way to accurately draw weightlessness. Kahl claimed that the toughest scenes to animate weren't the ones where Peter was flying, but the ones where he was just hovering in midair. It seems sort of silly to say that it's tough to draw somebody who's not moving, but as Kahl pointed out, the business of animation is basically motion, so it did take somebody with immense skill to make sure that Peter moved, or in this case didn't move, realistically. The music was again handled primarily by Oliver Wallace, and 9 songs were written for the film, with 7 making it into the final cut. The most interesting of these songs was the film's opening number, The Second Star to the Right. The song was originally written for Alice in Wonderland entitled Beyond the Laughing Sky, but when it was determined that the song didn't fit the film, the music was recycled and the lyrics rewritten for Peter Pan. See kids, it just goes to show you that you should never throw anything out. Ever. And finally, on February 5th, 1953, Peter Pan made its debut in theaters.
Peter Pan!
So even in 1953, Peter Pan was a very well-known and beloved story, so how does Disney's adaptation hold up? Well, first things first, we have to look at the animation, which honestly is darn near immaculate. We talked about the difficulties with actually animating a lot of these scenes, and the fact that I've never noticed or even thought twice about how natural the characters look throughout, no matter what they're doing, is really a testament to just how good the Disney animators are at their craft. And I thought the scenery was beautiful throughout as well. The contrast between London and Neverland and the use of vibrant colors really helped set the scene and the mood for the film. I also thought that the story was well done. The tale of Peter Pan really has everything you could want. There's action and adventure, soft and emotional moments, and also plenty of magical Disney moments as well. It's not easy adapting a well-known work to film, but I thought just about every decision Disney made with the story was the right one. Even the fact that they don't dive into Peter's backstory I almost like better, because it gives Peter this sort of legendary aura around him before he even appears. And I'm also one of those people who has seen the stage play before, and I felt Disney did a very good job keeping to the spirit of the play while also tweaking enough things to make their version original. I thought the music was also handled very well. The songs, especially You Can Fly, are memorable and iconic, but I actually thought it was Oliver Wallace's incidental score that stood out to me the most. The score reminded me of Snow White and how the musical cues accentuated the action on the screen, and this was most evident in the scenes where George loses his temper in the nursery. It really is a subtle thing, but it helps enhance the emotion of the characters greatly. But where I think Peter Pan really shines is with its characters. They are so vivid and unique, but what I like about them most is that, at least at this point in Disney history, they're as complex as any characters that we had seen through this point. You have a character like Captain Hook, who can be both sinister and mean, but also comic relief, and even the heroes are shown to have flaws. Tinkerbell's an incredibly jealous character, and Peter shows that he can be selfish and immature. The thing about giving your characters and even your heroes flaws is that it just makes for more interesting characters and storytelling. Pure good versus pure evil is fine, and there's plenty of that in this film. There's no denying who the good guy is and who the bad guy is. But those little added dimensions to the characters just helps make them more unique. Of course, there are some less than ideal elements in this film as well. I thought there was a bit too much focus on female jealousy as a character trait, especially because it seemed like almost every female character had it, but that's not the biggest faux pas the film makes. If you guys have watched my channel long enough, you probably know what's about to happen, though it has been a few
Racist alert! Racist alert! Racist alert!
Ah, there it is. Well, no sense avoiding it. Let's dive into some racial insensitivity. So, there's really no other way to put it. The film's characterization of Native Americans is pretty offensive. Throughout the film, Native Americans are related to animals and called names, and Captain Hook even drops a slur that's causing an awful lot of controversy these days with a certain Washington-based football team. But of course, the biggest and most egregious of these offenses has to be the musical number What Makes the Red Man Red, which essentially hits on just about every major element of racial characterization of Native Americans. There's really no way around this one. The depictions of Native Americans in this film is very offensive, and it is kind of hard to defend Disney on it. As I've said in the past, though it wasn't right, these sorts of things were a little more generally accepted back in the 1950s, and in all fairness, most of the racial elements were seen in Barry's original play, so it's not like Disney just pulled them out of left field. Of course, all this being said, even animator Frank Thomas has admitted that if Disney were to do Peter Pan today, they would have to rethink the Native American scenes, and I think that goes without saying. Of course, as it stands today, these scenes are in the film, and that's why I think it's important to acknowledge and talk about these scenes, that way we can learn from them, as opposed to just ignoring them and sweeping it under the rug. But racial awkwardness aside, Peter Pan is still a great and iconic movie. At the end of the day, it's a story about growing up, and I actually thought this theme was handled incredibly well just in how the different characters approach the topic. You have Peter, who never wants to grow up, but eventually accepts that it's okay if others want to. There's Wendy, who's sad about the prospect of growing up before deciding that she's ready, and even George, who thinks it's high time for his children to grow up before realizing that maybe having some of that inner child in you isn't such a bad thing after all. Honestly, I think this is one of the more in-depth looks at a theme that Disney has ever done. I mean, how often can you say in a Disney movie that they looked at a specific topic from multiple different angles, all drawing multiple conclusions, and yet all leading to rounded character arcs and happy endings? It's pretty advanced stuff. There's a reason why the story and characters of Peter Pan were so beloved then and still are today, and in my opinion, I think that Disney's adaptation of this classic story still holds up as one of the best. Roy Disney's concerns over Peter Pan's success were unfounded, as the film was a major critical and financial triumph. Critics praised the film, although some of them did lament leaving out some play elements, particularly the omission of the audience applause scene. Personally, I think it would have been a little bit odd to have a scene like that in the film. It's one thing in a movie theater setting, but in today's age of home media, I would have felt a little bit strange clapping to a children's movie by myself in my apartment. Audiences, however, didn't seem to care as much about the deviations from the play, as the film, which cost $4 million to make, made $7 million, making it the highest-grossing film of 1953. The film was so popular that it even had its own board game released the same year. So that's basically the 1950s version of a movie-based video game, right? Only I'm sure people actually enjoyed playing this board game as opposed to most of the movie-based video games. Peter Pan received 5 full re-releases in 1958, 1969, 1976, 1982, and 1989, and was given a limited release at the Philadelphia Film Festival in 2003, and a limited release in theaters in 2013. Through all of these re-releases, Peter Pan has made a lifetime gross of $87.4 million. And in 2002, Disney released a direct-to-DVD sequel to Peter Pan entitled Return to Neverland.
Direct-to-DVD sequels. That's a rant for another day.
Peter Pan has also had a huge influence in pop culture. The film was known to be a favorite of pop music icon Michael Jackson, spawning his famous Neverland Ranch, and a line from the film, "All of this has happened before and it will all happen again," actually helped inspire the theme for the 2004 TV series Battlestar Galactica. And of course, Peter Pan is still highly prevalent in Disney culture, with Peter being a popular meet and greet character in the parks, Peter Pan's flight being a dark ride at the Disney park since Disneyland's opening in 1955, and the story still has popularity today, thanks in part to the Annie Award-winning TV series Jake and the Neverland Pirates. But possibly the most lasting element from Peter Pan wasn't Peter at all, but rather his sidekick, Tinkerbell. Tink has gone on to become an unofficial mascot of sorts for the Disney company and a symbol for Disney magic, becoming a hostess of the Disneyland TV series, and even becoming an integral part of the Disney logo. Yeah, you may not think about it, but that arc going over the castle in the Disney logo is Tinkerbell spreading pixie dust, so yeah, she's kind of a big deal. And starting in 2005, Tinkerbell headed the new Disney Fairies franchise, which has led to her starring in 6 movies, and Tink even has her own star on Hollywood's Walk of Fame.
Jeez, how did Peter become such a second fiddle to his own sidekick?
So although it took nearly 15 years to come to life, it's clear that Peter Pan is still one of the films that best embodies the magic and wonder of Disney.
Well guys, that about wraps it up for me this week. I hope you all enjoyed and let me know what you think about Peter Pan. Also make sure to subscribe to my channel, and if you're still in a Halloween mood, make sure you check out last week's video. Make sure you tune in next week for a special video. And as always, make sure you check out the Disney Guy Review playlist. And I'll see you all next week.